Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 6th McCall lecture, held in honour of our founder, James McCall. Tonight, I'm delighted to welcome Lizzie Lockett, Chief Executive Officer of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, who will deliver the lecture on Proactive Regulation, It's Not the Minority Report. For some years now, I've had the privilege of having some insight into the work of the college. Heads of school get to sit in council at the moment, and its primary function is the regulation of the veterinary profession. I have been immensely impressed by the talent of the staff that work within that organisation and the drive and the desire to be more than straightforward regulatory organisation, to be a force for good in the support of the profession and in those that we serve, particularly the animals under our care. So the RCVS is so much more than just the police that will give us a slap in the wrist if we're naughty. And perhaps the best examples of this in recent years are the Mind Matters initiative and the Vet Futures project, of which both Lizzie has been at the heart of. The Mind Matters initiative is to understand the challenges we face in our working lives and to promote well-being within the profession, whilst Vet Futures seeks to support and develop the profession through taking a comprehensive look at the future. Being the CEO of a professional body like the RCVS is not a straightforward matter. You've got a president, you've got a governing council, and you're there to facilitate the strategy and the direction of travel. But it's important that you bring leadership to that role. So it's a difficult balancing act to follow. And in my opinion, Lizzie does that with elegant aplomb. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lizzie Lockett to the 2018 McCall Lecture.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ewan, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me here to the Professor James McCall Memorial Lecture. It's a great honour. I was last here in Glasgow in the summer when I was involved with reading out the names at the graduation ceremony, the first time I'd done that. And I remember saying to somebody there, gosh, this is very stressful. This is a really important day for people. If I mess up the pronunciation of their name, then that's really bad. I said, you know what, I'd rather be talking to a room full of people using my own material. It'd be much less stressful. I wasn't right about that. But we live and learn. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, as outlined by Ewan there. Many of you are EMS RCVS, many of you are fellows of the Royal College, and some others of you are on your journey towards becoming members of the college. Some of you are nurses, hopefully, or maybe working with nurses. Some of you live and work alongside veterinary surgeons. Good luck with that. So you may think you know the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, but this evening I'd like to give you a slightly different perspective on some of our recent activities and hopefully a sense of where your college, and it is your college, is heading. And just a quick apology to those council members in the audience who've probably heard a little bit of this before. Just imagine you're sitting at home watching live at the Apollo rerun on Dave. There's always something that you didn't catch the first time around, right? So, I know you've come to hear about the college, but I also know that you're used to having very esteemed veterinary surgeons speaking to you. So you might want to know who this whippersnapper is who doesn't know the first thing about veterinary surgery and why am I here. So a little bit of a potted background that might perhaps give you a little bit of context about who's speaking to you. So I was brought up in North Yorkshire on a farm. This is my dad and me doing the lambing just this year, so I still go home to help with the lambing. At least I did up until recently. My dad's just sold the sheep, which is quite a tough decision and left me and my brother, I think, a bit sad about that. So it was always kind of assumed that maybe I would become a veterinary surgeon. And duly, I took the exams, the A-levels to do that, started off on all of those subjects. And I spent a little bit of time in a local veterinary practice. And I hated it. I found I was squeamish, I was desperately sentimental, I pretty much cried over everything. I didn't like talking to people. All of the reasons why me being a vet was going to be a really, really bad idea. So I took a bit of a volte-face and did an English degree. Went to Oxford to do an English degree. Ended up working in journalism, in public relations, particularly in agriculture and animal health. I've been going to BSAVA Congress since 1992, which is probably more than many of the vets in the audience. So I've worked alongside the profession for a long time without actually being in it. And I ended up joining the college in 2005, originally as head of communications, working on the Mind Matters project, as Ewan mentioned, became deputy chief executive last year, in 2016, and chief executive a year ago, almost to the day. So that's one story. But if Trump has taught us anything, there's always an alternative narrative. And the alternative narrative is this. On the farm where me and my brother grew up, James Herriot was being filmed in the Yorkshire Dales. And aged about 6 or 7, my brother Chris, who is there on the left, right, never know my right for left, wearing the red tie, decided he wanted to be a vet. Now, family history doesn't know whether that's because he was inspired by James Herriot or the rather snazzy red sports car that our current vet drove into the farmyard. But always the irritating little sister, that's me, I thought, if he's going to be a vet, then I'm going to head up his regulatory body. Now, Chris did indeed end up being a veterinary surgeon, and I'm totally delighted that he's actually in the audience today. So it's the first time he's heard that particular story, probably the last. It's the first time he's come to any of the activities of the RCVS in all the time I've been there, so I'm so delighted that he's here. You can tell from the brown and orange that this was the 1970s, and you can see me there, rosy-cheeked with determination to ruin his life. Probably not much has changed, but whichever story you believe, I am an arts graduate, and I feel very much out of my depth talking to a room of veterinary scientists. I know you guys are all about the evidence base, but if I could just ask you to suspend your scientific mind for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm not going to be showing you any graphs, charts, or data. I'm just going to be giving you a slightly different take on the profession that you know and love. So firstly, what is it that makes us a regulator? What do we do? What does regulation mean? The bottom line is we are a professional regulatory body. That means that we are in charge of working out the standards that get you onto the register that means you can practice, vets and nurses, the rules, the guidance, the code of conduct, the CPD requirements that keep you there. And then in the very rare situations, we look at the process that takes you off again if things have gone wrong. But we're also a Royal College, so we're unique in that we're the only Royal College that's also a regulator. So that means we have a lot of scope to do a lot more. So we articulate this by saying that we set, uphold, and advance veterinary standards. The setting and upholding being the traditional regulatory function, the advancing being more of the Royal College work. Fine. But what does that mean to the man on the street, or the woman, or the child, in actual fact? So this comes to this picture. So this little girl here is my best friend Georgina's daughter, Agnes. She's now 8, but she was about 5 at the time that we took this picture. This was at Countryfile Live, which is one of the kind of public engagement activities that we do as a college to try and help explain what we do to the general public. Now, Agnes wasn't confused in the way that people normally are. People normally think that we're the Royal Veterinary College, and they don't understand the difference between the Royal Veterinary College and the RVC, which was particularly tricky when Stuart, the principal of the RVC, was also our president. And when you start to explain it to people, for those fans of The Life of Brian out there, it sounds a little bit like the difference between the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea. Agnes didn't have that problem, but she didn't really understand what we do. So she asked me 2 questions. One was, do you know Supervet? Yes. Secondly, what is it that you do again? So I gave her the regulatory spiel and the eyes glazed over, so I had to think of a better way of explaining this. So I said to her, our aim is to make vets and nurses the best that they can be, which is not probably what a typical regulator might say, but we feel it's our job to make the profession fit for purpose as well as individuals fit for practice. It's not about waiting until things go wrong, but trying to be more proactive and enable people to be the best professionals that they can. So, the Minority Report. I expect you were wondering when I was going to get to this. Anybody remember the film? Some of you are far too young. Well, A, it was quite a long time ago. B, it has Tom Cruise in it. That probably rules it out as a one to watch for many of you. But it was actually quite a good film, and it had a good premise, which is what made me think of it in this context. So in the film, there was a pre-crime department. And the aim of that department was to solve crimes before they happened, based on knowledge from what they called precogs, this is one of them, who were psychics, essentially, and knew what was going to happen before it did, and they arrested people before the act took place. Now, in the film, as these things go, there's always a bit of jeopardy, and things go a little bit wrong. But wouldn't it be great if we could reduce the rate of incidents of poor professional behaviour in the profession, things that might lead to serious professional misconduct, by stopping them happening in the first place? So this idea of proactive regulation. Only a handful of concerns go all the way through our process, but in each case, stress is generated for the person about whom that concern has been raised. And also, let's not forget the person who's made that concern. They've been put in a situation where they felt the need to say something to a regulator, which means that they were probably under quite a lot of pressure. And very often in those cases, an animal has been hurt or distressed or damaged in the process, none of which is good. So how do we prevent this? So we haven't got psychics yet. But as you'll see from this picture, the regulator does have an eye on you. You may know Robin Hargreaves, who's often making snide remarks on my photographs, past president of the BVA. Just as an aside on the photograph, so when I started at college maybe about 10 years in, the current registrar said, you'll get invited to all of the do's at the congresses, but don't go, because nobody wants to be at dinner and find they're sitting next to the regulator. Now, I have a different view on that. I do go, and I wear the fancy dress. This was a masked ball at BVA Congress a couple of weeks ago. And I show people what fun it is to sit next to the regulator. A teetotal vegetarian regulator at that. They have a lot of fun. But we don't have a pre-cram department. Maybe we should be microchipping all veterinary surgeons, and maybe I should be there peering over my glasses saying, don't do that, keeping an eye on you all, but that actually doesn't happen. I know some of you have CCTV in your practices already, and maybe with telemedicine that will become the norm. But at the moment, we want a more proactive approach to making sure that things don't go wrong. So our key projects around this have been on mental health, learning culture, and leadership, many of which came out of our joint Vet Futures project with the British Veterinary Association, where we were looking at what the profession might look like by 2030 if nothing changed, and what we'd like the profession to look like and what we needed to do to get there. So I'm going to take you through a few of those this evening, and hopefully I won't give you too much information because I do tend to talk too quickly. So first up is Mind Matters. So this is a project around mental health, as Ewan mentioned. Who's heard of Mind Matters, by the way? A few? Excellent. I'm glad Stuart has got his hand up as our current chair of Mind Matters. So this was launched in 2014-15, when we were given £1 million from the college over a 5-year period, which sounds like a lot of money. Actually, exactly half of that goes straight to vet life, which I'll talk about in a minute. The rest of it is spent on a range of projects, and I'm going to give you a few highlights of those. It's a collaborative project, and we've got representatives on our task force from student bodies, SPIVs, BVA, BVNA, Veterinary Management Group, BSAVA, Veterinary Defence Society, no doubt others that I'm afraid I've forgotten. And I set this up as an enthusiastic amateur, I think it'd be fair to say. But we have achieved quite a lot, and we've now got to the point where we've got a full-time professional manager running it who knows an awful lot more about mental health than I ever did. And we've also recently had good news from our council that they want to continue to fund Mind Matters on a rolling 3-year period, so beyond our original 5 years, and actually also to increase our funding, which is fantastic. But why was this one for the college? Well, I think the profession agreed that there was an issue, and we put responsibility on individual veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses through the Code of Conduct to take steps to address mental illness. But we didn't really give very much support around that. We asked a lot of our veterinary professionals, but they maybe didn't recognise the issues, didn't recognise them in themselves, didn't know where to seek help, or felt that the stigma was such that if they sought help, they wouldn't get a fair hearing. So we really felt it was a duty, really, of the college to try and support that. So our project has 3 main work streams: prevent, protect, and support, and we're underpinned by some key principles. The prevent work is looking at what causes mental ill health issues within the profession to start with. So what are the causes of stress? What might it be about the people that we select to join the profession? How can we better support them? What is it around education and the workplace? The second part around protect says, okay, while we try and sort out some of those bigger issues, we need to give people the skills and knowledge that they need to keep themselves healthy. And the third area, support, is direct support on a one-to-one basis for individuals who really, really need it. And most of that we work with VetLife and independent charity, because I think that's the one area as a regulator where we could have a bit of conflict with our role. If we were supporting somebody around their mental health one day, received a complaint about them the next day, you could see that from a public perception point of view, that may not be seen as unbiased. So what have we been doing? We've been doing lots and lots and lots, and I've got a few things just to show you here. So on the issue of understanding mental health and how to support people, we've been running mental health awareness courses over the last few years with a lot of financial support from BSAVO, which has been fantastic. Small group courses, which give people the tools they need to have conversations with colleagues and understand when they need support. It doesn't turn people into counsellors, but it enables people to have difficult first conversations and understand where they can signpost for more help. We've also run some conferences. We run the Medical Mind Matters conference, which brought together the medical professions. This was one of the early things that we did. We brought together doctors, dentists, pharmacists to talk about the shared issues. And some really interesting projects have evolved from that, one of which I'll talk about in a minute. We also, in January of last year, hosted the first veterinary mental health symposium, and we're due to do another one of those in London next September. So coming from the Medical Mind Matters conference, a really interesting project came out of that. So I approached the Doctor Support Network, which is the doctor's equivalent of VetLife, and said, can you suggest to me somebody with what the mental health world calls lived experience, so somebody who's had a mental health condition who'd be willing to talk about it at our conference? And Louise Freeman, the amazing lady who runs the Doctor Support Network, thought and couldn't think of anybody who would be willing to do that. So in the end, she said, well, I've had some mental health issues. I will do it. So she stood up and did an amazing talk. But after that, she came to me and said, it's really bad that there's this paucity of role models, because the research suggests that role modeling is a really positive way of getting people to reflect on their own experiences and to seek help, to engage with help, particularly if you can have role models who are people who are really flying in their careers, who have not let their diagnosis determine who they are and the line that their work has taken. So between us, we set up the And Me campaign. Now, I would stress that And Me came before Me Too. In fact, Me Too was a Me Too of And Me. So we were there first, although it does get a bit confused these days. But we tried to encourage people to talk about their mental health issues, to encourage others to seek support. And we've run we launched it at the House of Commons in 2017, and we run monthly stories. And a relatively recent one was from Rob Pettit, who some of you may know, senior lecturer in small animal orthopaedics at University of Liverpool. Now, his story alone had 25,000 hits on Facebook, which was pretty amazing. And some really, really positive feedback from colleagues, from students. I've got one here I'll read to you. I always held you in the highest regard, Rob, but even more so now. I'm proud to be your friend. You're a great inspiration for opening up about this. And there was lots of other really positive comments. And he also found it very rewarding to talk about his experiences. And Rob went on to take part in an And Me live session at BSAVO Congress with some other colleagues last year, earlier this year. And it was amazing. The first time people had talked about some of their issues, you could have heard a pin drop in the room, but the number of people coming up to talk afterwards and to share their experiences was really, really valuable. We've also done about 50 speeches at different conferences and events, both in the UK, overseas, and also amongst other professions. And I think it's important to perhaps recognise that the veterinary profession is really leading on some of this work. So we've got the lawyers and the architects coming to us saying, the stuff that you're doing is really good. What can we learn from you? A good example of that was a session that I did in Washington in April at I have to read this because I always forget the name of the organisation, the National Academies of Science, Engineering and Medicine, talking about the And Me campaign. And they were really impressed with what we've been doing in the UK. And you kind of assume that America's ahead of the game on this, but actually not necessarily so. Since then, we've done a link up with the American Veterinary Medical Association. We're doing some joint work with them, and we signed a statement with them earlier this year. In the States, there's a real split between the regulatory and the leadership roles, so they don't have a kind of Royal College role. And more recently, in September, I was in the States for the American Association of Veterinary State Boards Conference, which is purely regulated. And I asked them, how do you work on mental health issues in the profession there? So this is the state regulators. And the answer that I got, which really, I think, puts into quite good contrast what we do, is that our role is to protect the public from people like that. So I think we do a little bit better. We've also published a guide jointly with the University of Manchester's Business School around stress and what really causes stress in the workplace. When people talk about well-being, they often say, oh, well, we always buy birthday cakes and we have a fruit bowl. Well, that's lovely, but I suspect nobody ever left a practice because there wasn't fresh fruit in the practice. They left the practice because they're stressed, and their stress comes down to much more work-related things. So bullying, perhaps, clarity around your role, whether your workload is balanced to what you want, which doesn't mean to say it needs to be the same for everybody, actually, but have that conversation. whether you're being developed as an individual and whether somebody's listening to you when you want to raise something and you feel you've got a voice in the practice. Those are actually the things that Eleanor O'Connor, who worked with us on this document, those are the things that her research suggests actually cause stress. And off the kind of around that whole area, we launched 2 or 3 years ago with the Society of Practicing Veterinary Surgeons the Vet Wellbeing Awards, and they're now in their 3rd year. The entries are open at the moment if any of you feel you'd like to join. And the purpose of those was really to try and benchmark what good practice looks like, to celebrate people who are really going the extra mile and doing some great stuff, and also to share examples of things that go well. And I think the overriding message to come out of that is that things can be different. Now, I suspect anybody under 30 probably doesn't know what playing conkers is all about, but here's some conkers. And I also had to work really hard to find a modern toss cartoon that I could use in this kind of setting. Those of you who know modern toss will know what I mean. So if you're a conker, you assume that coming home from work every day with a spitting headache's just normal, because that's what work's like, right? If you're a veterinary surgeon, you assume that coming home knackered and not having time to see your friends and never having time for lunch is just normal, because that's what you went through, so that's what the next generation needs to go through. But that doesn't make it right. There is a sense, I think, that we talk about this a lot, that you do need a certain amount of grit and adversity in your life to give you resilience, for sure. But that doesn't have to be an ongoing process that completely bends you out of shape. And this plays into all sorts of themes that are really live in the profession at the moment, around recruitment, around well-being, obviously, around retention, particularly important in the light of Brexit. All of these things are really key. So if I say to employers, okay, you're telling us about your recruitment crisis, you're saying that the RCVS really needs to sort that out for you, or maybe the BVA, depending on who happens to be in the firing line at the time. Simon's saying, not our job. But my challenge back to employers, not all of them, some of them is, okay, do you treat your staff like animals? Now, that's a bit extreme. But then think about this. The Animal Welfare Act says that animals need to have a suitable environment. Do all your teams have a decent environment? Do they have the time to do the job that they need to do? The animals need a suitable diet. Do all of your teams have time for lunch? They need to be able to exhibit normal behaviour patterns. Do you allow them to have social time? Is their time off actually calibrated at a time when they can do things with friends? Is there predictability about the work? That animals need to be housed with or apart from other animals. What kind of space do you give people in the workplace? And that they need to be protected from pain, suffering, injury, and disease. Now, I'm hoping nobody's going out there willfully injuring their staff, but do you have the right safety equipment? Do you have the right health and safety workplace? Do you have stress management as part of that, which is one of the health and safety things that they look at? So I'm being deliberately a bit provocative here. I'm sure nobody really looks after their teams like animals, but sometimes it's worth thinking about the amount of care and attention that veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses put into the animals under their care, and making sure that they put that back on themselves a little bit. And if you don't do that, I don't know if any of you saw this program. Has anybody watched Rod Gilbert? So he does this thing called Work Experience when he goes around various different professions and jobs and working with them. It's a really good program if you can find it on YouTube. He's a funny guy, but actually there's some serious points in there. And his assessment of the veterinary profession was wonderful vacation, shit job. Now, what I think he means about that is that as a veterinary professionals, there's a huge number of opportunities open to you, and it's potentially a wonderful, wonderful place to be. But if people don't look after themselves and the people around them, it can be difficult. But it does work, and these are some of the winners of our Wellbeing Awards who were given their prizes at the SPIVS Congress last year. So as I mentioned, we work very closely with VetLife. We give them a lot of money every year for their health support program and their VetLife helpline. Since we started My Matters, the calls to the helpline have gone up by 500%. So that's over a 5-year period. And we're reassured by the people who run the helpline that these are people who really need it. They're not just people who've read about mental health issues in the press and think they might give it a call. These are people who've got difficult problems that need sorting out. And in a kind of related thing to that is more recently working with the lovely Des Thompson in Northern Ireland, setting up Vet Support NI, where we've funded training and support for a peer support program there. Delighted to see that there's a peer support program here at Glasgow. It's a similar sort of thing, so it's not anonymous like the helpline is, but it is confidential and it's working really well. We've also done mindfulness courses, 2 mindfulness courses with the Webinar Vet. Now, this has provided a particular challenge for me, these mindfulness courses, because I get it. On paper, I get it. Weave your parachute every day rather than leaving it to the time you jump from the plane. So give yourself the skills and tools that you need. So John Kabat-Zinn is the founder of mindfulness, which is a kind of secular Buddhism. But I'm not very good at sitting still, and I'm not very good at mindfulness. And some of you who know me will know that my dear husband is a Buddhist. So he spends hours of his life meditating, and it's always been a slight source of controversy in our household. And he will say things like, well, if you don't have time for an hour's meditation, you need to do 2, which makes him quite punchable at that point, none of which helps my mental health and well-being. But millions of people around the globe do find mindfulness really works for them, and all of the evidence is there to say that it works, so I would urge you to try it. Just a little aside, though, which I think says something about veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses. So one of the challenges in the mindfulness course is to imagine a stream. This is the River Swale in Richmond, where me and my brother were brought up. That's his little wee dog there. So vets are asked to imagine a stream, and nurses, and have leaves floating down the stream. And then they're asked to put a thought on the leaf and watch the leaf drift by. So it's a way of accepting and letting go. Now, on these online courses, there's an ability for the people on the courses to email to the trainer asking questions. So the kind of questions that come in when we start on this exercise is my stream going left to right or right to left? How fast is it going? Is it going uphill or downhill? Which way should it be running? What kind of leaves are there? How many problems can I put on each leaf? I'm not sure I'm doing this properly. Am I doing this properly? I'm not sure I'm doing this properly. Now, that kind of just gives you a little window. No, just relax. It doesn't matter. It's your exercise. Just take it how you like. And none of this stuff is new. None of this stuff is new. Back in the 17th century, in his Anatomy of Melancholy, Robert Burton recommended everything from drugs, bloodletting, meditation, music, prayer, diet, exercise, keeping occupied, cultivating friendships. So this isn't some kind of cultish stuff that we're looking at. It's always been around, and it's always been useful. And in fact, none of this is a modern phenomenon. Suicide rate in the profession has been high for a long time. I know a couple of years ago, your McCall lecturer was Alf White's son. And I'm not sure whether he maybe mentioned this, but in his diaries, Alf White, when he was here at Glasgow, talked about his melancholy and his depression. And he said, for example, in 1930s, I've been getting intermittent fits of the blues of late, but I don't know what's up. I'm sure I've got nothing to complain about. And then later he said of the library, that place depresses me. You can almost hear the brains throbbing. I'm not sure if that's still the same now. So who knows if for him perhaps the writing process itself was cathartic, but it's certainly when people say, but it wasn't like that in James Herriot's days, this is just a modern phenomenon. Not so. So just to finish on Mind Matters then, so no matter what you might think of the politics of Alistair Campbell, he has been a brilliant advocate for mental health, talking about mental health issues, and he was a speaker at one of our sessions at SPIV's Congress, and he was very complimentary about what we'd managed to achieve. And I really think we've managed to raise awareness of mental health. If you go to any Congress now, there's a mental health or well-being stream. We've really tried to break down the stigma, so more and more people are now calling helplines and seeking help, giving people the tools and knowledge they need to recognise problems in themselves and in others. We've inspired people to run their own projects. There's lots of wellbeing weeks now, Wellvet weekends, all of these sorts of things springing up. And also I think we've started to change the way the RCVS is perceived into a more of a collaborative, positive force for good. And also there's been a positive impact on our own staff, where mental health becomes something that we talk about a lot more as well. But it doesn't stop with Mind Matters. This now starts to speak to a larger conversation around who we are as individuals, our frailties, and how we deal with them. It feeds into something that talks about what happens when things go wrong. How do we deal with failure? I really like this thing. It's called kintsugi. So in Japan, broken objects are often repaired with gold. The flaw is seen as a unique piece of the object's history, which adds to its beauty. Consider this when you feel broken. So do we show our flaws in shining gold, or we try and hide them? Google has something called the Google Graveyard. When projects don't go right, they actually celebrate that, and they actually show it and they talk about it. But that doesn't tend to happen. For good reason, one might imagine in the healthcare professions, you don't want to celebrate things having gone wrong too visibly, but we do need to talk about it. So I want you to put your hand up if a lecturer you felt a lecturer influenced you or was somebody that was really important to your development as an individual. I want you to keep your hand up if you ever remember, while you were a student, that lecturer talking to you about something that went wrong. About 5. So I think that we teach through all sorts of different ways, don't we? We teach through what we talk to people about, but also our behaviour and how we model that. And I think there's a lesson there, perhaps for all of us who are engaged in leadership roles, to talk more. Actually, I think my staff would probably prefer it if I didn't keep banging on about things that went wrong, but that's maybe just me. Right, anybody remember James, the band in the 1990s? Yay! What was their best song? Sit down. Right, so all of you who are able to, I'd like you to stand up. Those of you who are not able to stand up, please put your hand in the air. That was slightly noisier than I anticipated. Right, I'd like you to sit down if you've ever driven faster than the speed limit and have been caught. I'm glad to see my brother sat down because I'd have called him out at that point. Sit down if you've ever forgotten somebody's birthday. Sit down if you ever if you ever forget whether you've turned the gas off or not. Well done, you guys get a prize, you can sit down now. So what I've hopefully just shown is that breaking a rule, forgetting something, missing something, not checking properly, these are things we all do all of the time. And in this kind of environment, it's not a problem to admit to it. But something specific about being in a regulated profession, charging for your services, being the person who's in control, that takes on a whole new dimension to that and makes it much more difficult. The fact that no one minded standing up, sitting down in this environment needs to really try and translate through to all of your working life. And this stuff is important. Now, I'm not going to show you this video because we don't have time, but I would urge you to look it up. This is a video by a guy called Brian Goldman, who's a cardiologist in the States, and he talks about the impact of not talking about mistakes on patient safety and patient outcomes. And he talks about the fact that in the States, if you're I want to say rounders, don't mean rounders, baseball player, 3 times out of 10, if you hit a home doodah 3 times out of 10, you're considered to be great. If you do it 4 times out of 10, you're a legend. And he makes the point that if you're a cardiologist and you fail 6 or 7 times out of 10, not so good. But actually, if people don't talk about those failures and what went wrong and how they can make things better, then the profession, in his case, the cardiology profession, is never going to get better. And where's your curiosity and your ability to learn? So it's more important that we start talking about things when they go wrong. Now, sometimes failure is hidden, it's private. Other times people are being a little bit more open about it. I don't know if any of you have heard about the concept of a CV of failures. This gentleman, Johannes Haushofer in the States, has written up his CV of failures, and it's on the internet. And it's an alternative narrative, if you like, to his academic career. So he lists on there all the degree programs he didn't get into, all the academic positions and fellowships he didn't get, all the awards and scholarships he did not get, the papers that were rejected from academic journals, the research funding he didn't get. He also has a meta-failure at the end, which is, this darn CV of failures has received way more attention than my entire body of academic work. Now, it's a funny idea, but I think it's important that we don't talk about these things that actually eventually shaped our success. It's WD-40, it's well known that WD-40 was the 40th time at water dispersing that actually worked. We never really hear much about WD-1 to 39, but they were all important to get you to 40. So I think this idea of the hidden curriculum is really, really key. Now, sometimes a bit of a light relief here for you. Sometimes the blame game is a little more public. So last year at our fellowship day, an old school friend of mine and my brother's, David Gould, was given his fellowship, 20th of October. I duly put this photograph onto Facebook, so I was very proud of what he'd achieved. On the 21st of October, he put this photo on Facebook. This is B, his dog. And the blame starts raging between him and his wife on Facebook. Don't worry, I did ask him if I could talk about this. Who left it lying about? Why was it on the floor? Why was it there? It's not her fault. Somebody left it lying around. The blame game is starting to run. This is kind of what happened to his certificate. Now, there is a happy ending to this story in that we did get him a new certificate. But there was a lovely line that came up on this discussion, which is, there's a blame culture in this household, and whose fault is that? But there is a blame culture in the profession. I think we recognise that, and that's part of the reason why people aren't talking about things that go wrong and all of those issues that fall out of that. It means we're not learning from mistakes. It means people are unduly scared of the regulator. It means that people tend to cover things up. It has links to well-being in the workplace, retention, recruitment, and also public expectations around the profession. We could call this looking for a no-blame culture, but that seems quite negative. We could call it a just culture. A lot of businesses talk about a just culture. The way we've decided to look at it, though, within the profession, from a college point of view, is trying to develop a learning culture. So there's still accountability when things go wrong, but in a non-judgmental way. And the blame culture is something that we are very much alive to. So here's a lady who got her registration through the college. She came to one of our overseas days. The most beautiful day of my life, she says. And joining the RCVS can be one of the happiest days. It certainly is when people graduate. It's one of the best days. All of the presidents will tell you that that's a great day. But we also know that there is this fear of the college, and where does that spring from? And it's something that we need to address. So we're taking this very seriously, and in our current strategic plan, we have a whole ambition with 10 objectives that flow from it around trying to establish a learning culture within the profession. And as part of that, we did a survey, the results of which in detail are really yet to be published, but we had 7,300 vets and nurses had their say, and we asked them questions around reporting mistakes, trust, communication, incident reporting, complaints processes, who influences you, and lecturers came out very high. We had a 28% response rate from vets and 12% from nurses. There was a bit of an irony here as well in that the survey went out with a spelling mistake in it. I'd have to say it went out when I was on holiday. Not that there's a blame culture in the college, but, you know. And one veterinary surgeon wrote to us to say that he was absolutely appalled with the spelling mistake, and how could the college be trusted to do anything, frankly, if this was the level of shoddy workmanship that we put out, which was interesting. So what did people say? Unsurprisingly, a lot of people fear disciplinary action for mistakes. A lot of people said they were comfortable with reporting mistakes, but a lot of them also said there were no clear systems in the workplace for doing that. So this is before it becomes a college matter, but at the workplace level. Only about half said they felt encouraged to share and learn from those mistakes. Trust levels were high for colleagues, not quite so high for the RCVS, but I guess that's understandable. And the good news was that many thought the RCVS had a role in sharing learning. There was a high degree of consistency amongst the responses as well, regardless of whether they were vets, nurses, and where they were in their careers. So the good news coming out of that is that there is stuff we can do. And good news, as they say, is bad news delivered early. So what we're trying to do is encourage people where there has been a mistake to come to the college for advice first, rather than waiting till something might go wrong or covering it up in terms of how that client interaction went. We have a lot of knowledge. We have produced over the years, and we intend to do an awful lot more going forward. What are the top 10 areas for complaints, and how can you make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where you might become a subject of a complaint or a concern? Often what makes the difference between something going wrong and something turning into what we call serious professional misconduct is that something might get covered up. So it's not actually the thing that happened, it's what happened next that often can be difficult. And we're also improving our guidance that we offer. So, for example, we did a huge amount of work around guidance on GDPR, quite a niche subject area, but something that's very important for practices. We're publishing case studies around Schedule 3 for veterinary nurses and informed consent more broadly as well. And what we would like, I did promise you no charts, chart. If you see the dark green bars are advice calls and written requests for advice that we get into the college. So over a 12-month period, we had 1,800. The lighter green bars are concerns, 878 over that period. This is 2017. What we would like to do is move the numbers towards the dark green. So we get a lot more calls from people who want some advice on something rather than waiting until it becomes a concern that's raised with us. And we have a dedicated advice line to do just that. So looking at ownership of mistakes and failures, there's a very nice, neat explanation from a nurse, not a veterinary nurse, a human medical nurse that I saw on Twitter. I hate making mistakes, I try not to make them, but when I do, I own it, figure out how I can avoid it, next time share it with my peers. Seems really simple, job done. But there are a lot of barriers. There's not enough time in the day. There's not enough space for us all to get together. haven't got the right skills to know how to have a constructive conversation about this. We're not all in the building at the right time. We have too many meetings. Maybe the culture doesn't allow for it. There's all sorts of ways in which it becomes difficult to do something which on paper, on a little tweet, seems quite simple. But the good news is through Mind Matters, we know that culture can change, and we are really looking to try and support this. Now, sometimes I think the high level of intellect of veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses can get in your way when it comes to mistakes. You can be your own worst enemies. If you've ever read any Carol Dweck, she talks about the impact that being told you're clever all the time can have on your ability to deal with things when they go wrong. She's worth reading, worth sussing out. A slightly less intellectual example, though, came from a game that we had at BSAVA Congress a few years ago, where to get people onto our stand, we encouraged them to put wooden shapes into a wooden box as quickly as they could, and if they did it super quick, they got entered into a prize draw. Now, some vets came up and they couldn't do it very well, so they just hammered the shapes into the hole. This is going to go in, it's going to go in. Some realised they couldn't do it, and they literally just put the box down and walked away. They didn't say anything. They didn't say anything at all. They just walked away. Others came back because they could do it, and they came back, and they came back, and they came back. And I'm going to shave a microsecond off this if it kills me. And they came back 10 times in a day. Meanwhile, the nurses, broad generalisation alert here, the nurses calmly laid out all the shapes by the side, sussed out the box, which way it needed to go, and then calmly put them all in the right holes and won the competition. So I think you don't need to do OSCEs necessarily to work out if you're going to be a good vet. You're investing in far too much here. Just get some of these shapes boxes, and you can suss out who's going to be able to do it. So some of the things that we're doing at the college, we're trying to focus on encouraging people to reflect, which encourages people to think about when things went right and when they went wrong. And we've got a pilot of more of an outcomes-based CPD, way of recording your CPD. So we're really asking people to look at what they did, so what did I learn from it, and what next? How is that going to affect my practice going forward? We've also got a major review underway at the moment around graduate outcomes, which is looking at what is it, the skills that veterinary surgeons need to go forward in the modern world. The initial findings said that they needed to be more responsive, more adaptable, resilient, empathetic, a lot of things around behaviour. Not they need to know all of this stuff, but they need to have these ways of thinking, which is a slightly different thing. And the consultation around that's going to go live at the London Vet Show in a couple of weeks, so please do respond. We've also been working with a firm of solicitors, McCall, to launch the Veterinary Client Mediation Service. This was launched in October 2016. And this is a way of trying to sort out issues that may not reach the threshold of serious professional misconduct, and maybe at more of a practice level, doing it in a mediated way. Both parties have to agree to join into this. They've had over 1,000 inquiries in the last 6 months, and that's an increasing figure. Meanwhile, the number of concerns that come into the college have really dropped. So in the last 12 months, we had 519, which compared with 979 for 2015, 983 in 2016. So what's actually happening is that some of these lower level issues are being hived off to the VCMS and dealt with in a much more compassionate, reflexive way, leading to a mediated result. And then our focus and time at the college is being spent on those that potentially could lead to a charge of serious professional misconduct, which we're then able to deal with much more quickly, which is a win-win for everybody, I think, because the stress of waiting for results on a complaint can be, we really do understand that can be very difficult. So we've got some great people at the college who are really trying to come up with innovative ways of dealing with the challenges that we have. Our legislation was 1966, so quite old. But our registrar in particular, our head of legal services, is brilliant at coming up with creative ways of just pushing that so that we can work in ways that weren't envisaged at that point, which are much more humane for all parties involved in regulation. We also have our charity, RCVS Knowledge, which is doing some really great work around quality improvement, which links very closely to this concept of making sure we're on a continual learning journey. Definitely worth having a look at their website for more information on that. And it's not just the college. There are other people involved with building the culture of the profession. It may be the veterinary schools. It may be the practices who are seeing students on EMS. It may be a throwaway remark when you're sat in the car driving a student to a large animal consult. Bloody RCVS. Maybe something just cropped up, but those sorts of words start to stick in people's minds. It may be journalists who insist on talking about us striking people off the register, when we never use that language at the college. We always say removed from the register. Actually, the GMC uses erased from the register, which sounds like quite a different Tom Cruise film altogether. So there are other people engaged with that whole process. That we've been called Darth Vader to students. We've been called Voldemort, none of which is very helpful when we're trying as much as we can to be a compassionate and positive regulator. It's also there in how we behave as well. So also on the back of the Vet Futures work, we have been focusing on leadership, and this is a project which our president, Amanda Bogue, has been leading on. And this is about encouraging vets and nurses and other people within the practice team to take more control over the way they manage their careers, the way they manage their interactions, the way they manage their day and how they deal with things. And we know that not having control can be a key source of stress. And one key part of this whole program we've been doing on leadership is a MOOC, a massive open online course, which we've launched jointly with the National Health Service using their Edward Jenner program as a basis. We've had 550 people just gone through a pilot of phase 1 of that, and phase 1 of the project is being rolled out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. The project's been quite interesting in that it's been based around some audio dramas from the fictional town of Glenvern. So if you can kind of imagine the Archers, but with a bit more veterinary content. And at first, I think people raised their eyebrows a little bit at that, but actually over a period of time, they realised it's actually a really good way of teaching you about things that happen and giving you a platform to discuss stuff. And what we were finding through the feedback was that even those who'd been a little bit arch about it to start with were getting really concerned about these characters and, well, they're not behaving like normal and what's going on there? And they were really becoming alive to them. So when we roll it out, I would urge you to get involved. Some of the feedback that we've had has been really positive. It's given me a new way of looking at things. My self-awareness has shifted. It's been very thought-provoking, rewarding, broad-ranging, more involved than I thought, took more time than I thought, not necessarily a bad thing. And it's relevant for any stage in your career. And something I would like as a long-term thing is that we have more of these sort of, almost like an RCVS academy of online learning tools that can be available to anybody at any stage in their career. Also around leadership, we've recently relaunched our fellowship. We had our fellowship day a couple of weeks ago. Amanda presided. One thing we had, which was great, was something called Fellows of the Future, where we encouraged some students to come and talk about their research. I was humbled by how brilliant they were. It's not an easy thing to talk to a room full of people. We were in the Faraday Lecture Theatre at the Royal Institution, so somewhere steeped with history, and they did such a brilliant job. And future activities of the fellowship will include a roadshow going around the veterinary schools, talking to students about the role of the fellowship and how to get engaged. On leadership. So we have a lot of women in the profession now, which is very, very good. About 85% of our students are women. And we need to stop this business for once and for all, which is that women who've got good leadership skills are bossy. We need to get women in the profession starting to think about developing their leadership journey and to think about taking control of their own destiny, really. It's 100 years, though, since women got the vote, so that should be a good time to celebrate this. But I have a bit of a cautionary example here of how to do it. Well, I didn't think this was particularly good. So the National Trust wanted to celebrate 100 years of women getting the vote through a Women and Power tea towel. I suspect this goes right next to the Women Are Enfranchised laundry bin, and next to the You Can Bog Off the National Trust dishcloth collection. My predecessor at the college is a trustee of the National Trust, so I think I might have a wee word in his shell-like. So, talking of women, I hope you all recognised that when the blurb went out for this lecture that's not me. Equally, this isn't really very much what council looks like anymore, although this was a picture of RCVS Council meeting in 1902. They all look a bit serious and they look a little bit cross, and I suspect it's because one of them heard on the grapevine that in 100 years or so's time, that lovely big chair there would have a woman in it, who's Amanda, our very, very wise and capable leader of the college at the moment. We do still have a lot of those paintings and artifacts in the building. We're in a different building now, but if any of you want to come to the college and look at them, you'd be very much welcome. So we have moved on a bit. This is a more recent council photograph. We are looking at diversity. Flash forward 116 years, things are a bit better, but this is a bit of a lucky shot. There's still a lot more to be done. So we're looking at diversity in the profession. We're about to set up a new working group, which is going to be chaired by Neil Connell. Where's Neil gone? Can't see him. There he is. And we're going to be looking at all types of diversity within the profession, so ethnicity, gender, sexuality, socioeconomic status, practice types, disabilities, the full works. To help the college and the council be more representative of the profession, and also the profession be more representative of the public that it serves. Why is this important? Apart from all of the obvious reasons, you guys know about hybrid vigour. We need to have lots of different minds and lots of different voices in the profession to make it something that's really sustainable. We need to expand the breadth of people coming into the profession and make sure we're using all of the talent that's there. And to be fair, a lot of our focus had been on trying to encourage people into the profession from all walks of life. But actually, some rather more salutary conversations that Amanda and I have had recently with the British Veterinary Ethnicity and Diversity Society would suggest that that's only part of the problem. Actually tackling the way that people from diverse backgrounds are treated when they're in the profession, both by their colleagues and by the public, is of equal, if not more, importance. So that's not something that we're going to shy away from. Whoa, sorry. So you remember that first picture that people didn't look like they were having very much fun in council meetings? I'm not sure it's changed that much, but you can perhaps ask Ewan what he feels about that. So hopefully I've painted a picture for you of a college which is a more positive place to be these days. Less pain, more pain au chocolat. And if I've managed to introduce more chocolate into the organisation as my legacy, then I'm very happy with that. But it sounds as though I'm talking about an awful lot about what you should be doing, what you should all be doing. What are we doing as a college? Well, we've actually really recognised that we need to be aligned to the same values that we talk about. And we've been really challenging ourselves about how we can be more compassionate as a regulator. It was easy with Mind Matters, actually. It was a separate brand from the college. We had some great people involved with it. It was just on one side of our regulatory work. So I was over there doing all the nice stuff, while the core business was cracking on with the difficult stuff. Now that I'm CEO, I've got a different challenge. I've got to try and bring all of that learning into the mainstream of what the college does. We've moved on. We used to say, well, we can't do that because we're a regulator. I think we've now become a role college that regulates, that's unlocked some potential for us. We've become a more proactive regulator, which has enabled us to think about things slightly differently. But I think the next piece in the jigsaw for me is being a compassionate regulator. And I'll just spend the last few minutes talking to you about what that really means to us and to our team of really amazing, hardworking people at Belgravia House who are all working so hard on behalf of a profession which is not their profession, So we work really hard on practicing what we preach and trying to role model that behaviour within the college. So we focus on, we're a great place to work for women. We're number 7 in the median workplaces in the UK. We've recently been given status as an excellence in wellbeing organisation. We have the London Living Wage. We are a Stonewall diversity champion. And if we just need a good example of why the Stonewall stuff is important, let me give it to you. So Stonewall, as you may know, was set up originally as quite a hardline campaigning group for LGBT issues. It's now much more of a collaborative organisation. And we had a lady came to talk to our staff about the importance of being open and sympathetic to people, whatever their background, their gender, their sexuality. And she said she was a lesbian and she started in a company on a 1-year placement alongside another woman. And at the end of the year, they were both given presents. And the other woman was given a hamper. And in that hamper was her favourite chocolates, her book from her favourite author, some favourite smellies for the bath, all sorts of stuff that was really personal to what they'd learnt about her. The other girl, the girl who was talking to us from Stonewall, was given a gift voucher from Amazon. And she felt quite hurt by that. But then when she reflected on it, she recognised that the reason why she didn't get anything personal was that over that year, she had never felt able to talk about herself to her colleagues at all. Because early on, something had happened, and she didn't specify what it was, that had made her think that that organisation was not very open to people coming from different backgrounds and different walks of life. So she'd never talked about what she did at the weekend, where she went on holiday, what her and her partner got up to, what she liked to do at home, where she lived, any of that stuff. So she was a cipher by the end of a 1 year. And that really brought it home, I think, to me and to the team at the college, what it means to be yourself in the workplace and how important that is and how we can take that for granted so easily. So these are things that we're really passionate about. And there's some enlightened self-interest there as well. I think, you get reduced churn rate, increased motivation, increased willingness to be compassionate with the people that you deal with if you treat your people well. We also hire good people. And there's a nice little analogy here that I was given once, which is that if you only ever hire people who aren't quite as good as you and who are moulded in your same image, over a period of time, you'll set off from the big Russian doll to running a company of tiny little Russian dolls. But you need to have the strength and the courage and the pride actually in other people's achievements to hire people who look different to you, who are bigger and better than you. Hire good people and get out of their way is one of the ways of talking about this. And as part of that, as part of hiring good people, we're starting to talk more amongst other regulators. So some of the healthcare regulators I was at a meeting with recently around what values do we want to instill in people who work in the regulatory sphere? How do we make them proud of their work? How do we enable them to be compassionate in what can often be a difficult situation where they're dealing with, in our case, owners or veterinary surgeons, veterinary nurses who are in a really difficult place and need our support? How can we help them to instill those values, to deal with things quickly but with robustness? To be curious about what's gone wrong, but not to be judgmental, to speak plainly and not use too much legal language, but also to be respectful of people from whatever walks of life they come from. So all of this is leading us to a more compassionate approach to regulation. And I think this is something that we as a college can really develop and lead on. It's something that started with Mind Matters, but can now start to become part of the normal process of what we do. So we're putting huge energies into the proactive support of the veterinary professions, to ensure that they remain fit for purpose and are populated by surgeons and nurses who are happy, confident, have the right skills and knowledge, and can work in environments that can be challenging but know they have the support of their profession around them. And there is some self-interest here, enlightened self-interest, you might say, from the college, because by doing this, we are building a more supportive relationship with the newer generation of veterinary surgeons, I think, who are more willing to talk to us when things go wrong, more willing to build that more positive relationship with the people who are there ultimately to make them be the best that they can be. And if we get this right, it can be a win-win situation like these wee birdies on the hippo. Compassion is not a zero-sum game. It's good for the professions. It's good for the public. Obviously, it's good ultimately for animal health and welfare and public health. And it's good for the wonderfully passionate and committed professionals who are working at the RCVS, and hopefully for you all. So finally, any of you who follow me on social media know that I love this cartoon. It's called Ruby, etc. I hope it's amazing. I hope it goes well. I hope it's fine. I hope I don't go on fire. So when I was asked to do this talk back in June, I kind of thought, yeah, I could do this. This is going to be cracking. As of yesterday, I just wanted to get through it without going on fire. And I may not have set the world on fire with what I've told you today, but I didn't actually set myself on fire either, and for me, that's definitely a plus. And what I hope I did do is justice to the 100 or so amazing people at Belgravia House, our council, which are full of committed and really talented individuals, and all the great work that they're doing for your profession. And a final question to you all is, how can you help your Royal College to be more proactive and more compassionate? You are all members or soon to be members or allied to members, and you can only expect a feeble arts student like me to do so much.
At this point, I'm supposed to stand up and semi-formally thank our speaker for her elegant talk. But I feel a little bit about going off-piste. I thought that was a wonderful talk, a truly wonderful talk. This is the McCall lecture. Every other year we do the Wipers lecture. And I was at this vet school when Mr. Alistair Porter, the registrar of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, spoke at the Wipers lecture. And I mean no offence to Mr. Porter, but I think tonight's talk has shown how much we've changed in our outlook, how much we've changed in how we try to go about our business. And I am very excited by the direction of travel. I'm very excited by the culture, and I'm very excited by what we as a profession and the leaders in our profession are trying to achieve. And if it's just an observation, and I may be wrong in this, but when I joined the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons on Council, people would occasionally say, that's not in our remit, or that's mission creep, or that's not statutory, whatever. I never quite worked out what that meant. But I think I should also pay thanks to another organisation, which is the BVA. We're sitting tonight, and Simon and Amanda are sitting beside one another, And the really important point about that is that they came together to do Vet Futures, and they came together, and this nonsense about, well, actually, that's your territory, that's our territory, went away. And that's been, I think, very important for the profession in general. I'm struck by something else, and that is that we're honouring two guests today, Mary, that we honoured earlier this afternoon, and Lizzie, by asking her to do this talk. And there's a theme that runs through today, and one of them is how unassuming they both are. All I got from Mary after asking if I could name the building after her is, why me? You shouldn't be naming the building after me. And when I asked Lizzie to do this talk, I got a look in her face that said, why are you asking me? And I think what I tried to say about Mary's life earlier today and what Lizzie has demonstrated this afternoon answers that question rather well. And finally, we spoke about Mary's career and how compassion was so important in it. And it was a lovely bookend that you've ended in compassion being important in what we're trying to do. So I'll do what I'm supposed to do. Lizzie, thank you very much for a wonderful talk. And now Caroline will shout at me unless I give some sort of direction to where the drinks are. That way? So out the Lecture Theatre and back down into the Mary Stuart building.